I wanted to talk to you today about the BioWare Q&A about Dragon Age the Veilguard that happened. This was on the 14th, so I am like a week late with this, but I wasn't there for the live session. It was a voice call on their Discord server. So I was waiting for a transcript to come out, and it came out a couple days ago. And I wanted to go over it because it has a lot of information that is actually interesting for how the game will be and how it's different from the other Dragon Age games. And I figured I'd have the text on screen so that you could read along if you wanted to, or pause the video if you really wanted to read the text, or some of the questions I skip over. At least this first question is just about personal preference from the developers, and that's something I want to skip over because I don't have anything against them. I just want to get to the questions about the actual game and new mechanics, different mechanics. And I'll try and also do YouTube chapters for every different question, so you can read which question I'll talk about at what timestamp. And let's see what we can learn about the upcoming game from the Q&A session, shall we? So the first question here is, I've seen a lot of talk about only having 2 companions in your party instead of 3 for this game. What is the reason for this, and will we get the same companion conversations and banter as seen in the previous Dragon Age games? So that's something I'm interested in, because in the previous Dragon Age games you always had 3 companions with you, whereas Mass Effect you only had 2. Now in Mass Effect they also had a little bit of, not I would say banter, but some conversations, at least in the elevator in Mass Effect 1. And in Dragon Age, yeah, you also had certain trigger points where your party members would have little conversations with each other, and it just gave a lot of levity and character to them, even though you're not directly involved necessarily, and different companions would have different things to say to each other. It's quite neat that way, but this game is looking to be a lot more similar to Mass Effect, and one of those changes includes only having 2 companions with you while you're out on adventure. Now we've already seen that that's not entirely true. At least in the gameplay reveal, you also have Varric walking along with you, so you have 2 companions, and Varric, who doesn't count as a companion, but he's still there and helps you out. So with a little bit of luck, there will be more levels like that, and then you'll have your 2 companions, and you might have someone else helping you out. Corinne here says, such a good question, thank you to whoever submitted this one. I'll start and then I'll turn it over to John Epler. As you saw in the gameplay reveal, this is a much more intimate experience. For those that aren't aware, the reason why is that we want you to feel like you're actually in this world, like you're walking these city streets of Minrathous. You're looking up at the buildings all around you. You're a part of the place. It's much more intimate, and we believe as the narrative unfolds that this creates a lot more immersion. How this relates to companions, we went back and forth a lot, but we actually found that having 2 companions allows them more visibility and presence. We've talked about the incredible depth and focus we've put on fleshing out these companions. They're very fully realized. Here you really get to see them more clearly, you get to see them shine. When you see Lace Harding jump into the air and release a volley of arrows, you can only get that because of this more intimate view. So I love the spotlight that's been put on them. I think in addition to the banter, one of the things people are wondering about is, okay, but what about gameplay? Again, this has come about from our testing, working with the internal team, and also our lovely council of players. We found that in the combat system, when you're planning your strategies, 2 felt like the right number to manage. Keep in mind, Rook also has a lot of different types of actions, abilities, individual attacks that are more fleshed out than ever before. Timing and positioning matter a lot, so this really felt like the right balance. The number of inputs and actions we're asking you as a player to make, including directing your companions, is higher than ever before. I will also say that when I engage with the companions, I actively control what they're doing more than I ever have before in any of the other 3 games. But John, I'll toss it over to you for the banter. Before I get to John's answer, gameplay-wise, it's tough. I'm conflicted about it, because if it's what they say, like you are more involved, keep in mind if you've maybe played Mass Effect 1 or well, any of the Mass Effect games, but I recently played Mass Effect 1, and then yeah, you are doing a lot of telling your companions which ability to do on what enemy, because this will make firefights a lot easier. You know, you have several enemies coming at you. You probably can't take that many hits, so you're gonna want to say, okay, hey, if you have biotics, like, you know, lift this guy up in the air, this other person use an ability to disable their weapons or their powers, and I'll also do something to weaken or disable temporarily some enemies, or one of them at least. And so you're constantly telling your companions what attacks to do. Now, Dragon Age started out with the tactics system. At least in Origins, there was kind of an emphasis on setting up automated tactics and behaviors, and so your companions operate independently, and it's very important to make sure that they have certain rules set up for what ability they'll do when. That sounds a bit confusing, but in practice it's not that bad. What you do is, in Origins, for example, you can set up behaviors and say, hey, when you're low health, take a health poultice. Or, you know, later on they're potions, but in the beginning, in Origins, they're poultices. Attack the enemy that's attacking my character. Or if always put on your tank stance that increases the aggression that you create and therefore draws enemies to attack you. And that was gradually let go a little bit, and so by Inquisition you really don't worry about those behaviors that much anymore. You count on your companions though to do their abilities and make those determinations for what abilities to use by themselves and do a reasonably good job at it. And this game is faster paced, but it looks like they also want you to be more involved with what abilities the companions use and what kind of attacks you do, and strategize much faster in per every combat encounter. Strategize what you're gonna do. So I don't necessarily like it. I like having more people in the party. I always dislike, you know, having 7-8 companions with in your party and then not being able to bring any of them for no really good reasons. I don't want to compare the game. I don't want to compare this game to Baldur's Gate, but in Baldur's Gate 2 you have a companions limit, and one of the most popular mods there is actually to unlock that and let you bring lots of people. Now that breaks the game balance a little bit. It makes the combat much easier because you have so many opportunities for your team to do attacks. But I know that a lot of people feel the same way I do, where it's like, you have a handful of companions, why can't they come along with me? Or why do they talk as if they were there with this mission even though I didn't bring them? There's no good in-game explanation for why they can't be there, but mechanically it just wouldn't work out. Then John Epler talks about the banter. He says, so banter, honestly, I don't think you could stop the writers from writing banters. I will say for myself, it's one of the more light and fun things to do. You get to write little stories, little arcs between the characters, and the Veilguard is no different. Banter is still absolutely a core part of it. We've got global banter, you know, the general stuff you get in all spaces, as well as mission-specific stuff. It's definitely still a big thing. If anything, it's the most we've ever done for pairings of companions. Beyond that, we've also made sure, and I mean, I've been on Dragon Age for a while, and I know there's been an issue with, well, I don't want to miss this banter. So we've even added stuff like interruptible and resumable banter as well. It's a core part of the experience. Everyone loves hearing these companions talk to each other. Everyone loves hearing these little stories and relationships develop over the course of the game. And as mentioned before, companions are the heart of this experience. So we still have it. If anything, like I said, you could not stop the writers from doing it, even if you try. And Corinne says, one thing that comes to mind, maybe people are wondering, with 2 companions in the field, do I get less interaction? Like, do I get a scene with my companions interacting with a broader group more often? And the way you'll gather them around the kitchen table, there's just so many of those moments where they're all interacting with each other. Those are some of my favorite parts. John says, yeah, and that's a good call out, because I think the other side of it is, we aren't talking too much about your home, but we also want to make sure that they feel like they have relationships and a life outside of just the times you take a certain pair of companions out on the field. So we made sure that they have interactions there as well. So that means that while you're out on missions, they'll interact with each other, and while you're at your base, your home base of the lighthouse, they'll interact with each other, rather than just stand around waiting for you to talk to them. The next question is, how customizable is the backstory of Rook, that's the main character? Will we get to determine their past in the character creator? John says, absolutely. Rook has 6 different backgrounds you can choose from. Each one is tied to one of the major factions in the Veilguard, and each one sets out who Rook was before they were recruited by Varric. While it sets up the broad events, as you go through the game and have conversations either with members of your faction or other characters, you can define not just what those events were, but what they mean to you, or meant to you, what your motivation was. You can define what kind of person you are as you build up Rook, because again, we want to make sure that role-playing is at the heart of this experience. Taking Rook, giving them a background in the world, but letting you decide what that means and what that says about you is also a big part of it. Again, there are 6 factions in this game, 2 which anyone who's played Dragon Age for a while would remember. You've got the Grey Wardens and Tevan Crows. We also have 4 new ones because we're in Northern Thedas. We've got the Veil Jumpers, the Mornwatch, the Shadow Dragons, and the Lords of Fortune. A lot of different options, different backgrounds, and a lot of opportunities to define who your Rook was and who they are now. So I wonder how often is going to get brought up throughout the story. In some games, it's a little bit of background. Now you might remember if you played Inquisition, depending on what race you pick for your character, that determines who your family was in their background, and there are a few dialogue options as well as interactions and war table missions that have to do with what's still left of your family or your friends or whatever, and how you might feel about them and how that gets dealt with. Some of it can be flavor text and some of it can be changing the story a little bit, but you know, obviously you're not going to get an entirely different story depending on what your background was. Still, Origins went the furthest with this, where every character has a unique origin story, and so you have a handful of different origins, and the first mission of the game is totally different depending on what character you pick for that. And so that's different from, if you pick an elf mage, that's totally different from a human warrior and a dwarf. You could be a noble, and all that stuff is different. And so that's totally different in the beginning, and then when you later revisit those areas, your interactions and your feelings about them are going to be different. So that could be a big question, is if, let's say you picked a Grey Warden background in the Veilguard, is when you then later meet Grey Wardens, how is that interaction going to go? And are they going to care that you're not really working for them anymore? Or how is that going to work out? Next question. Will crafting return, and has it been improved since Inquisition? You might remember you could at least make pretty customizable weapons and armor in Inquisition. Corinne says, will crafting return? You can absolutely improve and customize your gear. Yes, that is a big part of RPG progression, so yes, you can improve and customize it. I will say though, it's different this time around, and it does get into spoiler territory, so I'm going to be a little cagey about it, but there might be a mysterious entity that assists you with that and will be an important part of the narrative. So we'll see how that works out, but I guess crafting and improving your gear, there's going to be a character that is important to the story or the lore that is going to help you with crafting. We'll see who that is. Next question. Can we kiss or romance Manfred the Skeleton? He's the skeleton companion of Emmerich the Necromancer. And Matt says the answer to that is, I would say not that skeleton, but we're not saying no skeletons. I am very curious if that is just a joke or if we're going to have some weird scenes in the game. Next question. What were some of the development considerations you had to take into account to ensure this game flows and functions with prior games, and Dragon Age Keep if the Keep is being utilized? Now we already know the game does not import a save file from an older game, and Dragon Age Keep, the website where you could make a world state that then changes the choices from the first 2 games for your Inquisition gameplay, is not being used here. Now, depends on how you feel about it, but ideally you don't need an external website tool to be able to make a world state. Not only that, it's been 10 years, so at this point it's like, do you still want to use that tool, or are you going to say it's been too long, we can't expect everyone to use that and have that work that way? So that's already been confirmed. They're not using the Keep, they're using an in-game tool. And Corinne here says, we did an interview with IGN that goes into some of the details here. To summarize, we have taken a different approach to how you import your decisions this time around. It is now fully integrated into the character creator and serves a dual purpose. It's not called this in-game, but I playfully think of it as last time on Dragon Age. When I talk about its dual purpose, it's been 10 years since the last Dragon Age game release, so it serves as a refresher on critical events, as well as allowing you to remake decisions that are critical to you. The thing I love about it is it's very highly visual. It uses the familiar tarot card aesthetic, so it's actually a very visual and playful experience as you go through it. It's very much important to us that it's built into the client though. You can play this game entirely offline, no connection, you don't have to link to your EA accounts. That's been a really big request, so the refresher plus making those decisions in-game, I think we're all pretty happy about that. I don't want to spoil anything by revealing which decisions you can import. Y'all don't want the spoilers, but it's been a really interesting creative intersection for us, because on the one hand, this is a whole new adventure. You're in Northern Thedas. These locations you've literally never been to before, so that affects what will matter and what we're not using this time around as far as decisions. Obviously, there's some very, very clear connections to existing characters. It's no secret that the Inquisitor, our dear Inky, is gonna show up, so that is a factor. If you've played Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, you will also remember that not everything that you've done and made choices is gonna carry over, and even some of the stuff you put in on Dragon Age Keep ended up not mattering at all for the later games. And I assume this is similar where they're only going to take in some of the most important plot points into account, only what is going to directly affect this game. Assume questions that are going to be like, in Trespass, or did you disband the Inquisition or not? Who did you recruit? What is your relationship with them at the end? Did you pick mages or Templars in Inquisition? Think that some of those choices you've made will affect what kind of state the world is in at this point. Did you exile the Wardens or kept them around in Orlais? I feel like that is a good, important question. And who went with them to Weishaupt? Was it Hawk? Was it Alistair? Was it Loghain? Who ended up, or Stroud, who ended up going with them? Maybe is one of Hawk's siblings a Warden? Might be irrelevant, well, we'll see. But I think some of those questions are going to be actually determining, hey, what has happened in these past few years and what kind of characters are going to show up. Next question. Will this next game be an open world game, or is it confined to just Tevinter? We already know it's not confined to just Tevinter, and it's not a big open world game. It still has all these instanced areas, like essentially like we're used to before the Veilguard. John says, yeah, so you are in Northern Thedas, but the game only begins in Minrathous. It doesn't stay there. I think one of the most exciting things for me, and again, I don't want to get into too much spoiler detail, but getting to go and work with the art team, the narrative team, the design team to build out these locations we've talked about, places that characters have referred to as where they've come from, places that characters obviously in previous games have hailed from, has been absolutely exciting. So you do start in Tevinter in Minrathous, but again, that's not the entire game by any stretch. Corinne says, the first half of the question is it an open world game? We've gone back to what we believe delivers the best and most curated, intense narratives. So this is a handcrafted experience, it's mission based. Now these locations can open up, you can go back, solve mysteries, do some really great side content. Not fetch quests, not grind quests, some really great side content. But I want to be clear, it's a really curated, handcrafted experience. So I assume some of these levels, like, that's what I was concerned about with the gameplay reveal with Minrathous, is that it's clearly a very linear short level. It's just really beautiful, big open place, but you only get to walk down one path directly to the end. Maybe there's stuff where it's like, you can go up or down, and, you know, one of them might have a chest at the end or whatever. But that is just the opening of the game. So from what we're being told, it sounds like you do have, hey, these places you can only go to for certain missions, and some of these places are a bit more open. They've already said something along like, expect more places like the Hinterlands, which it has a bit of a negative connotation for beginner players, because the Hinterlands was big and had enemies you definitely couldn't handle just yet. But that means that there are some areas where you can go and explore. It's not necessarily clear if you have to go this way or that way. And if you go the other way, you might find some side quests. And if you go this way, you might go directly towards where you need to go for your main quest. And that's fine. I mean, also if they said it's like kind of like Mass Effect 2 in the mission structure. That's also fine by me. There's some places where you go back to maybe because they're a hub place that you might do some shopping, but otherwise there are just different places that you go to because this is where you have to go to now for your next mission. And maybe there could be some quests that take you back to an area you've already been to for something else. I hope that something like Minrathous isn't something you see in the first mission and then never again, but unfortunately we'll have to find out when the game comes out. And John says, just to bounce off that very quickly, the most important thing for us and what Corinne was saying about handcrafted, obviously we're talking about how characters, story and narrative are critical to us, and this has allowed us to build those experiences in a way that emphasized that really well, while still tying it into the story threads and story beats. That sounds like a vague answer, but I think what he just means is all the places you go to are supposed to be relevant to the story and to the characters, and not just for us to show off what we can show you. Next question, will the companions have unique specializations like Dragon Age 2, or the same as Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age Inquisition? So in Dragon Age 2, every companion that you had a unique specialization that you as the player could not spec into, but only that character could, so they have unique abilities. And in Origins and Inquisition, every character has a specialization that you as the player could also pick if you had that same base class, essentially, and learn the same abilities. Corinne says, I think the best way for me to describe this is that yes, our companions will have abilities that are truly unique to them, but also the companions do fall into the archetypes of mage, rogue, and warrior. For instance, you might be surprised to hear because she has a bow, but Bellara is in fact a mage, and I love that. The bulk of the abilities of the companions are based on their own unique personalities. Nev is the only mage that is an ice mage, so you get distinct abilities for her, but because she's a mage, she does have access to abilities that all mages share, like time slow. We really like the balance there. It's a good mix of representing their archetype, their class, and also their distinct specialization or personality, or whatever you want to call it. John says, yeah, actually, I would say the word personality is a great one. All of these characters exist, have a story, have a history of how they became who they were, etc. Part of that was finding that intersection between narrative and gameplay and making sure that, again, we serve the needs of gameplay and also allow these characters to exist as their own people, not just in conversation, but out of conversations as well. And Corinne says, I would also say that as part of that core mage kit, healing spells are there. Which, that is important for her to clarify, because a lot of us had a healing spell, like directly healing in Dragon Age Origins and 2, and in Inquisition suddenly find that gone in favor of like a temporary barrier on your character. And we were like, no, we want to have two mages in the party, one that does healing magic and is really good at buffs and healing, and one that does big damage and maybe doesn't need to worry about healing everyone else. That is also one of the questions I have about the only two companions is, are you going to still want to bring more than one of each character class? And you kind of have to if you want to spend time with all the companions, but we'll find out. Next question, will Dragon Age the Veilguard have tactical combat still? Corinne says, yes, combat gets quite tactical. Obviously, this is an evolution of the combat system. I talked about immersion, wanting to put you in the world like you're actually living and existing in it. But it's very tactical, and I will say we have a robust difficulty system. The tactics are increasingly important the higher difficulty that you go. So if you're showing up for a highly tactical experience, I would crank that difficulty in particular. But I want to make sure I'm super clear in my answer. You saw the gameplay reveal. Our pause time tactical mode is not overhead. It stays close to Rook. It does allow you to cycle between targets in and out of combat. There's a reason for that. As the game progresses, you didn't see this in that opening hour of the game, but it will display strategic information on the enemies, their vulnerabilities, their elemental weaknesses, their enhancements, what they're resistant to, so leading into elemental gameplay matters a lot. So they're saying, yes, it will be very tactical, but you have to imagine it will be in a different way than you're used to, completely different. So you pause the game, you assign commands to people, you have to worry about elemental affinities and weaknesses. Those kinds of things are important. And what they say, no, not overhead, is because what you used to do is you zoomed out and then the camera would be over your head, really high up. And all the characters would be pretty small. You would get to assign commands and maneuver them a little bit strategically. and then let it play out in real time and do their abilities. And here you stay right in third-person mode, basically. You assign the abilities. Don't expect it to get much more tactical than that. Maybe you can set up a few behaviors to automate, but don't expect it to be a game it's not. It's not a turn-based combat, and it's not semi-turn-based combat. It is mostly all real-time. You just can pause the game to assign commands, just like you were able to in Mass Effect. And Corinne said also, I would also say this is a long answer because it's such a great question. Tactical decision-making also takes the form of coordinating your ability usage between Rook and your companions to create synergies, and or really devastating, we call them detonation combos. So let me give you a couple of examples because it can be really hard to visualize, so hopefully this helps. One of the tactics that I personally enjoy in my own builds, I just recently played as a Veil Ranger. I love it, it's one of my favorites. If I'm fighting fate-touched enemies in Arlathon, I like to use Belar's Galvanized Tear to pull enemies together. It's like a gravity well. You then slow time with Nev. Slow time affects the world around you, but it doesn't affect you. So you clump them up, you slow time, and then with Rook I came in and do a devastating AoE or damage over time spell or ability. It's even better if it's a lightning-based ability, because the Fates touched in Arlathon are vulnerable to that. There's so many layers of coordination and strategies and tactics. We did talk about the devastating detonation combos. That's one of my favorite features, because that's when you're really leading into explicit teamwork between your companions or Rook or the companions together. When I build out my team and I'm going into a mission, I try to ensure that I have at least a couple possible synergies, detonation combo synergies between my team. It might be between Harding and Nev, Nev and I, or both. So here, I'd go into battle, pause time, open the ability wheel, get information on the enemy, and the wheel will actually tell you that there's a synergy combo. You might have seen a screenshot that says combo available. It will remind you of synergies between companions. You can queue both of those abilities up at the same time, close out the pause time menu, they'll both execute, both abilities will happen. Then the detonation AoE happens and applies debuffs to all the enemies in a radius of it. It's so satisfying. I can't wait for y'all to see it, but the interesting thing is that too is a tactical choice. I'm choosing to use my companions to do that, and that means I'm not using them to heal me or give me that defense bonus or to knock an enemy off a ledge, so it's about the opportunity costs. I could spend the rest of the session talking about this, apologies for being long-winded, but this is one of my favorite parts of the game. Next question. Will there be a photo mode in the game? Corinne says, we are looking into it and we know there's a lot of interest in that. So expect maybe not during the release, but as a patch, there will be a photo mode. I feel like that's the standard now for lots of games to have a built-in photo mode. But a lot of games also lend to making you want to take good screenshots, and I'm all for in-game tools to let you do that, rather than having to get a mod or an external tool to try to take pretty screenshots when there's cool characters and environments to admire. Next question. A lot of people were asking about abilities. Are we going to be limited in how many abilities we can pick from the wheel? The answer is yes. Corinne says the ability wheel does have a capacity. You have to choose which 3 abilities you want to bring for Rook, which 3 for a companion, and which 3 for another companion. What I like about this is there's kind of an emergent gameplay depending on who you and your companions are coming into a mission with. Now the reason for that is that it actually creates a really interesting balance between strategizing, having to do that strategy about your combat kit before the mission, and then the tactical decisions once you're in the field deciding what to do. I want to clear one thing up. While there are 3 ability slots for Rook, there is so much more than that. Other actions that you can perform directly from the wheel. Like you'll have an ultimate ability associated with your class or a specialization, so there's variance there. There is a type of item you can get that functions like abilities. They're typically like buffs or enhancements in the form of runes, so you'll control that for Rook and or the team from the wheel. You may have also seen that you can direct which targets your companions can focus on, but what you might not know is that a lot of the companion gear really synergizes with directing your companions. When you issue those commands, that too will proc depending on the gear they have equipped. Really interesting and strategic effects. They can be more ability-like, more like proc effects. There's just so much from the wheel that once you get in and see everything working together becomes more and more apparent. So yes, you only have 3 ability slots on your wheel, on your quick bar essentially. You'll have lots more abilities. You have to swap them in and out, probably in between combat or in between missions, one of the 2. And they'll synergize differently with different abilities from your companions. and you have some, I would call them maybe opportunity abilities, just while you're playing, and hopefully that means things don't get too stale, because using the same abilities over and over does get a little boring. Next question. Will Fireball and Cone of Cold be back as possible spells? Corinne says, all these combat questions, really good. Fireball and Cone of Cold aren't specifically back, however their successors are Frost Nova and Meteor. These serve the exact same combat role and function as those other abilities. I would also say it gives them quite the glow up. Meteor in particular, so satisfying nuking a group of Darkspawn with a well-placed Meteor. It's wonderful. So there will be Frost that freezes enemies in place, and spells like Meteor or Fireball that do explosion in a place and do a lot of damage. That's was kind of a given, but so hey, these kind of abilities will be back. They'll just be named different and look different, and hopefully cooler than before. Next question. What accessibility features are available? Is there an arachnophobia mode? I don't know if you've seen that, but there was one in Grounded by Obsidian, where instead of spiders, you can tune the slider and they'll look less and less like spiders, which is kind of funny. Corinne says, oh my goodness, arachnophobia. I am wicked afraid of spiders too. My partner always laughs at me, I'm just terrified of them. That said, that's one we're saving for a little bit closer to launch before we'll go into full details about accessibility features. I do want to assure you we've spent a lot of time thinking about this topic so that you can play the game in a way that really works for you. I'm excited to share that when the time is right. Now, don't expect an arachnophobia mode in the game. I do assume there will be spiders, because I feel like every game has had giant spiders that you have to fight at some point. But I assume if they could do some accessibility features, it would be things to do with subtitles, with the colors for color blindness, for using adaptable controllers, for rebinding keys. Some of that stuff would really help. But other than that, we'll see when it comes out what kind of things they've come up with. Next question. How long is the time skip from Inquisition to Veilguard? John says, anyone who's paid attention to Dragon Age, and I can say as somebody who's been on Dragon Age since Origins, timelines are always a little iffy. They change and they morph over development as we see how long things are taking. But for the Veilguard, we were actually pretty consistent for the start that it's been about 10 years since Trespasser. As you may or may not have noticed, Varric's become a bit of a silver fox. I've seen a lot of comments about that on social media. Yeah, 10 years. Solas' ritual has taken time to set up, and you're kinda coming in at the end of that hunt. It's approximately 10 years, because they were talking about specific... I mean, as a bit of a lore nerd, they were talking about 952, 53, 54, and I think 954 in the in-game timeline would be about 10 years that it's supposed to be. I suppose whether it's been 9 or 10 years in-game, that's not going to really matter too much, but we'll find out. Next question. Will we be able to change companions' appearances and outfits, or are they fixed like in Dragon Age 2? In Dragon Age 2 you could upgrade your characters, your companions' items, gear, but it was unique to them. They couldn't take it off. It could just get better stats over time, and then in the later acts it would usually change a bit their appearance. And in Origins and Inquisition you're pretty much completely free to outfit them however you want. However, in especially Inquisition, their armor look changes depending on who they are and what kind of armor they normally wear. Matt says, we loved how the followers turned out in Dragon Age 2, but it was sad given our constraints that we just had to keep them with one basic outfit. We really tried to make some space for them this time around. They have iconic color palettes and things like that, but they do have a wider range of appearances that you can find for them. Some are just cool, but then there are some that are tied directly to their narrative and just kind of what's happening in their life. So I assume a little bit similar to Inquisition, or maybe a little bit more expanded compared to that. Next question, will we be seeing or visiting Kal'Sharok? That is the other big dwarven city that is still intact, other than Orzammar that we see in Origins. Matt says, in previous games we've kind of alluded to this before. It was a lot of fun to hint at the locations that were off the map, the mysterious places you were not going, and so you could just bring in some props, some characters, a piece of art, things like that. Even Tevinter was only vaguely hinted at, and we'd just add drips and bits of pieces, so that stuff was really fun. In the Veilguard we're actually getting to visit a whole lot of those locations that had only been hinted at for real, so you do actually run around Tevinter and a bunch of the other locations we've revealed. There's also means we're not completely filling out the map. There are new things that we can start hinting at and we can start drip feeding. It's kind of fun. I'd say for what we can show of Kal'Sharok and other locations, there's more to do. So I assume that means no, you do not get to visit that. I wonder if we get to visit any dwarven places at all, because usually there are sections with deep roads or with some dwarven abandoned places. Next question. Will the dialogue wheel and options be similar to Inquisition and Andromeda in the sense that it's more tone-based? We've already seen this, essentially. So it is similar to Dragon Age 2, where you get to pick an Inquisition in that matter. You can be a sarcastic character, but you can also just set the tone for what you kind of want to say. And John clarifies you have a tone wheel, emotion wheels, choice wheels, which is not about your emotion, but about just making a decision. And investigate is back as well. Obviously, that's just asking follow-up questions. So I don't expect any big departures from the previous games. Next question is, how extensive are Rook's dialogue decision trees? John says huge. We want to make sure you have choices and, of course, about role-playing. And imagine scenarios like, hey, if you meet an elf and you're also an elf, maybe you want to be able to have a conversation option about that. That aside, we kind of know what Dragon Age is like. It'll have somewhat expansive but limited dialogue options. Obviously, the game is, at the end of the day, trying to tell a story, so you are kind of being pointed in one direction to progress the story in however tone you wish to do that. Next question. Are all companions romanceable by all players' characters, regardless of race and gender? And Corinne said, yeah. We've talked about this in some of the interviews, and I've seen a few articles about it, so I'd recommend everyone to check out those articles. But quick review, each of the 7 companions has full romance arcs. They are romanceable by all genders, absolutely. Something that's really important to us on the team, and so I just want to make sure and double down on that. That doesn't mean player sexual. She clarifies what that means is they don't suddenly have a preference for men or women just based on what you're playing. They'll have their own fully fleshed out identities. They are true and authentic to that. So in this game, they're all pansexual. They'll have histories, they'll have romances. Sometimes you'll hear about preferences and things of that nature. What I really love is if you don't pursue a romance with them, they'll actually build their own romances with each other. In one of the interviews, I talked about Lace Harding and Tash getting together. I give that example because it's one of my favorites. Now, just expect that there'll be the same connections they make no matter what. If you do not romance Lace Harding or Tash, they'll get together. Assume that that's how the game plays, unless something unfortunate happens to one of those characters. I don't know how much difference there can be in that if you could actually lose one of them, not recruit one of them, or have one die. But just assume that these aren't dynamic interactions with each other. It's either you romance someone or they might get together with someone else. Inquisition had something similar with Dorian and Iron Bull, for example, implied getting together. Or in Dragon Age 2 you had these banter conversations that implied Fenris and Isabella were seeing each other, at least just for fun. And unlike Inquisition, they will not have set sexualities and preferences for specific races and genders of players. So you don't have to really worry about that when you're creating a character if you're not going to be able to get with the character you like the most. Next question. What are the markings on the faces of the Elven Warden and Veilhopper? So people have noticed, and especially the big lore nerds, that Davrin, the Warden, and Belara, the Veil Jumper, have Valaslin, the Elven writing on their heads, and it is different from what we've seen before, so people couldn't necessarily say, hey, this is from that Elven god or not. Matt says, so there's quite a few, I think more than we've done before, tattoos from various cultures. We're bringing the Valaslin back, of course, but there's a ton of different options, especially when we're going into these new regions. Each area has its own kind of visual language for that. We're bringing the Valaslin back, and a couple characters have them, but we've customized them a bit. They're a bit more specific to their personality. I'll leave this question here on the screen for one sec so you can read it, but I'm skipping over what are you as a developer most proud of and excited for players to experience? And I'll go to the next question. Next question, why does Varric have dark hair now? Matt says he's been adventuring for a while now. His hair is more grey, but he's been in very dark scenes so far, so we'll see him in some more contexts soon. And will the Inquisitor be appearing in the flesh, or are we just choosing their major Inquisition decisions? Corinne says yes, they will. The Inky does appear. We know how attached you are to the Inquisitor. We've seen the love for your OC. Yes, the Inquisitor shows up. We'd already confirmed this, so let me just say you can customize them and include some of our new customization options. John says, and I think beyond that, the story of Solas and the story of the Inquisitor obviously are tied together as much as any story, so it would have been strange for us not to bring them in for this one. They're gonna be a part of this story. So yeah, you're gonna meet your character again during your character creator, or maybe a little bit later when you actually get to meet them. You get to try and recreate in the character creator your Inquisitor, or make a totally new one, depending on what you want to do. And maybe make some of the decisions, or you've already made them at the start of the game, for what they were like, what they ended up doing during the story, and if they were maybe romantically involved with Solas or not. And you get to see them again and talk to them again, kind of like how Hawk showed up in Inquisition. Next question, will there be any planned DLCs and transmog armor? Corinne says, right now our focus is entirely on the quality of the game. It's so important at this stage for us to be all in, all attention on finishing this game and delivering on the quality and promise for it. So that's all I can really say on it. We're 100% focused on this thing being the most complete game we can make it. I want to emphasize there's not going to be any microtransactions or battle passes. You don't have to connect online. Our focus is making this the most complete single player we possibly can. Now this was kind of a twofer question. Will there be transmog? Hell yeah. I'm the kind of player that believes fashion is the real endgame. Yeah, there's a transmog system. Absolutely. It's sick. So transmogging is, if you're a World of Warcraft player, you know that term. In Final Fantasy, they're called glamour. So yeah, changing the appearance on your armor pieces so that you might be wearing, your ass-kicking outfit. The outfit that has the best stats, but it's all mismatched, ugly parts of armor. But no, you'll be able to change them and make them look the way you want to, so you can keep a consistent, cool look, even if this other article of clothing otherwise would look very different. And I would assume there are planned DLCs, whether they have already designed something or not. There will be something. If this doesn't have a definitive ending to the story, if it's not like okay, there's definitely no way to tie anything else to this, there will be DLC either that takes place before the ending of the game, or there will be stuff that takes place after the ending of the game. Rest assured, I am sure they will make some more content, because they'll come up with something cool to add in that maybe they didn't get to this time around. Like Kal'Sharok or something, where maybe a place they would have liked to explore, but they couldn't finish that or get that, work that into the game right now, the base game. It'll come in some form of expansion. I really don't think they're gonna make a game like this and not have some downloadable content later on. There was also a question if any of the characters will be asexual, and they've already said no, that's not the case. None of the characters in the game are explicitly asexual. At least all the companions are pansexual, meaning you can romance all of them. There are no characters that, at least in your companions, that you cannot romance at all. So if you were looking for representation there, it's not really in there that is clear. Maybe you can roleplay your character as that. Next question, can Mage Rook do blood magic? Will blood magic be a skill tree separate from regular magic? Okay, this gets a bit spoilery, so let me just say, Rook has some pretty good reasons to avoid blood magic. Rook is not going to want to be interested in that, but I will say the mage skill tree is packed with all kinds of spells, traits and perks to give you a ton of flexibility in your magic. I'm going to go off script just a little because I've seen just tell us about the specializations. I'm not going to tell you the deets, but there's a necromancer one, an elemental one, and there's one that's actually more like a combat mage, and that's my favorite. Now we already know from the IGN, or no, not IGN, the Game Informer video that I just did, that during Game Informer they talked about something that happens to Rook that makes you more connected to the Fade. If you've played Inquisition, you might know that if you talk to Solas about blood magic, he says he doesn't do it because he says blood magic actually weakens your connection to the Fade and makes it harder for you to go in it. Whereas if you want to spend time in the Fade, then yeah, you're not going to want to do blood magic at all. So maybe that's the big reason why Rook would want to stay away from that, because either their blood is extra dangerous in this instance, but also because blood magic weakens your connection to the Fade. That's not something Rook wants to do in this game at all. And the specializations, we've already seen what they're named, and we'll find out which one we want to pick when we're actually going to play it. People asked, can we name the Griffin? There's a Griffin that accompanies Davrin, the Warden companion. John says, so someone in your party, again spoilers, may have already named the baby Griffin, but don't worry, Asan is a very good boy. So yes, that there is a Griffin in the game, a little Griffin companion, part of, he's probably with Davrin the whole time, and he already has a name. It's called Asan. And from what I'm told, yes, you can. Yeah, one of the future questions, I'll answer that one already. Yes, you can pet the Griffin, you hug the Griffin. There's lots of opportunities to interact with the Griffin. And for those of you that loved a Mabari companion that you had in Origins that you could then summon in Dragon Age 2 as a little extra, no, there's no Mabari companion, so I'm pretty sad about that. Now, I actually said, I don't know if I said that in a video, but I'm a little bit sad. If you think about it, the Mabari looks like a dog with a docked tail and cropped ears. So, you know, you can say, no, that's just the way Mabari look, and I'll accept that. But I'd like a slightly different design for Mabari to some extent. But no Mabari companion, no dog to be one of their companions. And or just a summonable thing to help you in combat. That's very sad. A little bit about the character creator. They asked, will we get to see any of the character creator before the game releases? Corinne says, yes, you will. You'll get to see it as we get a little closer to launch. And will we be able to play as a Qunari, dwarf, elf, or human? Yes, you will be able to choose all 4. So yes, you can play as them, customize them, have different horn options, hair options. Oh, and this is an interesting part to me. Here John says, to bounce off of that and earlier questions about the backgrounds, each lineage, depending on the lineage you choose from, and the background, there are some specific callouts. For example, if it's a Mournwatch, the Mournwatch being from Navarra and Mages, if you play as a dwarf, you can still pick Mournwatch, but obviously your experiences in that faction is going to be different from, say, a human or an elf. There are also specific callouts tailored to those combinations and with the intention of giving each lineage a little flavor as to how they fit into that faction as a whole. Yeah, because that'll be interesting, as Qunari are not widely accepted pretty much anywhere. Dwarves, not so much either, and they can't do magic. So if you pick a magic faction as a dwarf, that's going to be different and interesting. Oh, here's a question about Rook. Will Rook have a set of default names? John here says Rook's last name is dependent on what faction you pick as your background, but your first name is something you can customize, and there's a little name generator in case you have trouble coming up with a name for yourself. Next question, when will the voice acting cast be announced? And they say over the summer, but not just yet. Same answer for collector's editions and pre-orders and required PC specs. So that's all stuff we really want to know. First of all, who are all working on the game? That's something nice to be announced. But also, when can we order it and what's included? And can I run it on my computer? That's also a good question. I assume that if you have something equivalent to a modern console, then you should be fine. About the music, they're not really telling us a lot about music at this time, but they are saying, yes, there are tavern songs again and some little unique songs in there that they made that you'll get to hear if you visit some of the taverns. When writing the overall story of this game, what themes did you want to have as the prominent focus? So John at least reveals, I will say for Dragon Age the Veilguard from the beginning, one of the biggest themes has been regret. How regret shapes people's lives, how to deal with their regrets, and maybe how people move past regrets. Each of the characters and the story as a whole have elements of these. We wanted to have that thematic, that cohesiveness to the game's story and game's writing. So it'll be interesting to see how that weaves into the narrative, and what exactly everyone will regret. Next question, will our heroes and companions leave us if we go against their wishes? Corinne says, do you all just love pain? Do you want to make us cry? If you go against their wishes and make decisions they don't like, I will tell you, you can piss them off. They might not agree with you, and they will take some time away. That said, this is the biggest threat to Thedas we've ever seen, so they will always be willing to defend Thedas. But yes, you can piss them off and they'll leave for a minute. As it relates to them showing up to defend Thedas, well yeah, they will, unless... John says, no spoilers, Corinne, no spoilers. Corinne says, alright, but they want it. So there are possible ways in which you can mess things up so badly that either they won't be around to help, or yeah, maybe their companions are dead or something like that. So we'll see what that entails. But that's the idea I get, at least, that you can make some wrong decisions and that can actually hurt or get some of your companions killed. Next question, what was the thought process behind making Harding a companion this time around? And they said, hey, yeah, obviously we've recognized that people love Harding. She's been a fan favorite. Beyond wanting to tell more from her perspective, she also has a strong connection to Solas, Varric, and the events of the last 10 years. So I'd say Harding, probably one of the first ones we settled on, is like, yes, this is a character we want. And the writer had a story that they wanted to tell with her, so it just made sense. And she has one of the companions that has good insight on what kind of person Solas was back in Inquisition. Especially for you if you didn't play Inquisition, which you should go and do right now if you haven't yet. She'll have some information there for the player, for Rook. Next question, I'll do both of these. They're about world design. What approach are you taking to quest and world design in Veilguard? John says, summarized here, they wanted to make sure that the quest felt relevant to the threat you face. And Corinne says again about how everything is handcrafted. You're not going to be gathering shards in the hinterlands. Everything is built with intention and they're lovingly handcrafted experiences. This is something I already heard several times that they said, and it's like, okay, handcrafted as compared to what? So I think what they meant to say is they don't want it to feel like MMO quests by like, hey, go kill this many boars and collect pelts and go back to the town and turn them in. But also, they don't want to do anything that's generated. No, it's not going to be like Starfield where you randomly generate side quests and then have to go do them. And then, is there any location that can only be accessed by making specific story choices? And they said, well, locations can fundamentally change based on decisions you make. Some of the parts of the world you go to, you can have the choices you make have an impact on how these spaces exist and develop. There was one question about Solas here. Will Solas still occasionally or dramatically speak in Iambic pentameter? And John says, well, Solas is written by Patrick Weeks, and Solas is a returning character, and yeah, Solas is still Solas. And I want to point out Patrick Weeks also mentioned he doesn't actually speak in Iambic pentameter, he speaks in the cadence of Hallelujah. I don't know if, I don't know, not familiar with the song well enough to know if Jeff Buckley's version is different in cadence to the other versions or the original, but that's the specific version that Patrick Weeks mentioned. In that kind of cadence, it is very strange to imagine, and you probably have to hold it next to the lyrics to actually see and realize the connection there. But he speaks with a kind of rhythm, and it's based on that song. They asked, will our decision of who was left in the Fade be important? And they said, well, we won't say it's not important, but whoever you left in the Fade is not brought up. So during the quest in Inquisition, where you have to choose between Hawk and one of the Grey Wardens to leave behind in the Fade, whoever you did choose to leave behind is not mentioned. So there's no reveals about whether this person is still alive or not and what happened after that. Now, whoever you didn't leave in the Fade might get brought up. I question, will we have mounts again to ride like in Inquisition? And they say, no, you will not have mounts. I assume mounts were added to make you feel like you can traverse the big areas a little better. But one of the big functions they have is they unsummon all your companions you've brought with you, and when you then go get off the mount, then they are again with you if they got stuck on the terrain somewhere way back where. And that's not a problem they'll have in this game. Oh, again, side quest design. How is the side quest design? Will they be mostly story-based, or will there be a lot of Radiant quests for power like in Inquisition? John says, we talked about this a bit earlier, but they are all handcrafted and story-focused. The narrative, the companions, not just the companions, but the characters in the world as a whole, are so much at the core of the Veilguard that anything other than handcrafting quests just felt like it would be a disservice to the game we're building. Corinne says, and maybe we can clarify as well, because power was such a divisive mechanic in Inquisition, there's no mechanic like it that blocks your progression until you fill a bar. That's just not a thing in this. You have the autonomy to engage in these quests as you like. There's no grind out gates before you can progress. John says, that's right, and again, we want to make sure that doing this content feels as natural and part of the logical flow of the story as possible. If you remember, in Inquisition, you had power, and doing certain side or main quests required a certain amount of power. So that would mean that if you hadn't progressed in the side content much, you were forced to do some side content to get up to speed and be able to do the main quest. And they said, we don't want to do that this time. Will there be a similar system to the war table? And Corinne says, we haven't talked much about the player's base, the lighthouse, but what I will say is your headquarters, so to speak, has its own unique purposes and functions. So that's an area that we'll leave for when we talk more about the lighthouse, and when you have a chance to hop in, you'll be able to see what those unique purposes are. So they didn't say yes or no really to that question. I assume that there is a system that isn't quite like the war table missions, especially something people really disliked about the war table missions, and a mod that I recommend you install if you play on PC is to immediately make those war table missions instant, because they otherwise take real-time hours, and sometimes quite many, before they're completed. And nothing's worse than queuing up a mission to get a cool reward, only to be told, well, come back in 8 real-time hours, and then we'll be done. And they asked if there is dual wielding again for warriors, and they basically said, no, it is not a thing. In warriors, do two-handed weapons or sword and shield. Dual wielding is only a thing this time for rogues, like it was in the past. Dragon Age Origins is the only one where you could be a viable build where you get strength and dexterity and use 2 full-size weapons as a warrior and be a very high DPS warrior. And then you share stats with rogue in that respect. But ever since Dragon Age 2, you cannot be a dual-wielding warrior. And that's going to be it. I mean, obviously, any questions I skipped over, I'll still have up on the screen in text, so you can go back and read the text if you want to, because I didn't think those questions were too interesting or relevant, but all of the text is there from the whole Q&A session. So it's exciting for both for us as well as for the developers that the game is finally coming together. And yeah, it's not gonna make everyone happy, because everyone that wants it to be just like Inquisition, or especially the games before then, is going to be disappointed. People that want it to be just like Baldur's Gate are going to be disappointed. This is definitely going to be its own thing that is a little bit similar to Mass Effect, and of course a little bit to Inquisition, but it's been a long time, and it's going to be very different from what we're used to, and not going to please everybody, but hopefully people are going to like it. I mean, I've seen the gameplay reveal, the combat looks like something we can get used to, and I feel like we're gonna have to see if we actually like the systems or if it was too restricting. But it's just really, really nice to see this coming together and finally have something to look forward to in this franchise after 10 years. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.